consciousness, and also ancient lore and legends of this area. And I'll let him introduce more about the particular area. Lovely, lovely to have you, John.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Yeah, it's lovely to be on this. There's such a wide range of material presented. It's fantastic. I'm going to share my screen as well, and here we go. And yeah, let's see. Let's hope this one works. No, we did test all these out before. Oh, here we are. Here we are. Yes, I've shared it slightly different ways so you can see I'm actually on the screen as well. But I live on a peninsula, and this is it. Surrounded by the sea on 3 sides, and it's in the tiny southwest corner of Wales in the Celtic lands. It's the birthplace of St David, the patron saint of Wales. He was born here around 500 CE. And it's where St Patrick set off for Ireland in the century before David, and he actually set off from that beach that you can see on the picture there, White Sands Beach. So it's peppered with holy sites, wells, springs, all named after Celtic saints. It's a thin place, as Linda mentioned in her talk. And there's St David, the patron saint of Wales, whatever he actually looked like. But nowadays, you see, it's at the end of the road, this little place of St David's, the furthest place you can get to in Wales, really. But of course, back then, there were no roads, there were only muddy tracks, and the fastest way to travel was by sea. So this peninsula was an international hub of sea travel to Ireland, to Cornwall, to France, to Spain, and even to the Mediterranean on the trade routes. It was also exposed to the ravages of the Vikings as they scavenged down the western coast, and hence the names of most of the islands, like Skoma, Stockholm, and Ramsey. And it's Ramsey Island that I wanted to tell you a little bit about. There it is, a little tale about. It's less than a mile off the coast here. I can actually see it from my bedroom window. On Ramsey, back in the 6th century, there lived Saint Justinian, who was a noble from Brittany in France, and he came to Pembrokeshire to live on Ramsey Island as a hermit. Now, St David visited him and was so impressed with his holiness that he invited Justinian to become his confessor, the person, to whom David would go and tell his sins. And Justinian soon became close friends with St David and visited him quite often in the monastery, actually where the cathedral now stands in St David's. But Justinian was less impressed with the lax behavior of some of the monks, and sometime later he decided to isolate himself on Ramsey Island. And according to legend, he took, there's St Justinian, or Steenan as his name is, but according to legend, he took an axe and he chopped up the causeway that linked the island and the mainland. And as he worked, the axe became blunter and the lumps of rocks remaining became larger and larger. And those rocks are now known as the Bitches. They're still visible in Ramsey Sound, and where the tidal race waters foam and swirl past them at high tide. The final rock there is actually called the Axe. There were a few monks who joined Justinian on the island, but his strict instructions didn't go down very well with them. And actually what seems to have happened, or the story goes, that they rebelled against him and they killed him, cutting off his head. And then the legend goes that, to the astonishment of the killers, Justinian picked up his head and walked across the sea to the mainland. And he set his head down when he reached the mainland, and on that spot a spring of water sprang forth, which became the famous healing well. And there's the well, is pictured there, looking over towards Ramsey Island. There is a tale told that a man suffering from a swelling in his stomach once drank from the well, became sick, and then vomited up a large frog, enjoying good health from that moment on. Well, here's a poem that I wrote a while back whilst looking out over Ramsey Sound and pondering on St. Justinian. Like a river in the sea, so runs the Sound, a vicious, swirling tidal race that threatens aught that tries to place itself twixt land and Ramsey. Its teeth, the bitches, rear like ugly canines, ripping, tearing at the green sward, whilst maelstrom whirlpools suck with toothless gums. What of mad St. Justin's head, which, so legend says, was carried back beneath his arm by himself, though dead? Poor St. Justin, but such a fate as legend should retell your final end. A good true man, who loved God, but found that such tales should be attached in the swirl of Ramsey Sound. Now Justinian was reputedly buried where he laid his head, where the chapel now stands, close to a lifeboat station. And when I was a boy, I remember climbing up and running around the top of those walls, which would of course not be allowed these days. The well is sadly now padlocked, and many of the old wells are of course now capped off or dried up. There is a mythological story that is about this locking, capping, or drying up of the wells. In the Celtic worldview, there are two aspects of nature. The inner aspect was the soul of the outer world. And as long as a loving, respectful relationship with the inner soul of reality was maintained, all the world was alive, fruitful, and peaceful. And this relationship was made possible by the voices that lived in the wells, the beautiful maidens who lived in caves, wells, and springs. And the well maidens are a personification of the life-giving spirits of the land, the spirits of place. And where fresh, clean drinking water flows are the most sacred spirits of all. And these enchanting, fairy-like women were the sight guardians of all the sacred springs and wells. And when someone approached, the maidens appeared and gave the traveller food and drink from golden bowls. But one day, the ruler of the land, King Amangun, raped one of the maidens, held her in captivity, and stole her sacred bowl. His men followed their king's example all over the land, and the beautiful, balanced, generous world disappeared. No longer were there maidens to nurture the traveller, and all the wells and springs dried up. The voices of the wells were no longer heard. Soul sank back into the depths of the inner world, and the outer world became a wasteland. And this, I think, in some ways is a mythological representation of the mismatch in today's world. We have over the last 400 years lost our connection with Gaia and the soul of nature. We've lost the divine feminine aspect. We've lost our sense of integrated oneness with the whole of this living planet. We've lost soul. We have abused and raped the land because of the loss of balance and dominance of the patriarchal masculine energy. And the way I see it, now is the time, the rediscovery and the resurgence of the feminine aspect of the divine to bring balance and harmony back to the land, i.e., to the whole of human society. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And what a wonderfully fitting end, or almost end, to our day today. We started this morning, those of us who are here participating in the workshops, standing at a point where we could almost feel the sulfur, magnesium, and iron wells flow beneath our feet.